Humans are the only species on Earth capable of making meaning in sex. And that's a double-edged sword. For a lot of people, the anxiety in sex makes sex a horrible experience or a difficult experience to enjoy. But the flip side of it is the transcendent capacity for deep connection that can come through sex is one of the most unique human and wonderful things about being a person. Everyone, welcome to this episode of Get Your Marriage On. This is episode number 169. Woohoo! And I am so glad that you're here. We have some amazing lineup of speakers and podcast episodes coming up for the next few months. We've already planned them all out, and we've got a big treat for you. We also have Valentine's Day coming up. This is a big holiday for us, and we have, through the Intimately Us app, a fantastic challenge laid out for you where the grand prize is airfare for two to anywhere in the country. So it's definitely something you don't want to miss. If you don't have it yet, download the Intimately Us app today. It's free for Android and iPhone, and get right on the instructions that will be coming out towards the beginning of February. I also have our upcoming marriage retreat, and this is in March 14 through 17 in beautiful, sunny St. George, Utah, which also happens to be my hometown. This is a wonderful experience for you and your spouse to come and enjoy a romantic weekend full of instruction, coaching, outdoor adventures, and just a great time to get away. We keep this intimate. It's limited to a small number of couples just to keep that vibe, the kind of vibe we want. We bring in a private chef to do all the cooking, and we can accommodate your food preferences or allergies or whatever. And it's going to be a really positive experience for it. In fact, I know of 3 marriages that have been saved as a result of coming to our retreats, and many, many more couples have come just feeling a lot of replenishment, learning new things that really help them overcome humps or difficulties they've had in their relationship. Next week, Friday the 19th, we have a free workshop that we'll be offering via Zoom, and you don't want to miss this. If you're a woman that wish you could have more powerful, more pleasurable orgasms, or no longer need to cross your legs when you sneeze, or be able to jump on the trampoline like it used to before you had kids, then this workshop is going to be for you. Don't want to miss it. Studies show that about 30% of women can have an orgasm from penetration, which leaves 70% of women being unable to. But perhaps that number could be a little higher, might be higher in your own marriage, if your pelvic floor, which is the muscles in your vagina, were in better condition. Research also shows that the stronger and healthier your pelvic floor muscles are, the more pleasure you'll be able to feel from orgasms, which orgasm, by the way, is the most powerful pelvic floor contraction possible. And if your pelvic floor was in good condition, there's no more pain from intercourse too. I've invited a very special guest for this workshop to teach it. Her name is Polly Hanan, and she is a pelvic floor physical therapist, and she specializes in helping women have a better life with a healthier pelvic floor. She's created the No Kegel University, where she debunks the idea that you need to do more Kegel exercises or buy those weird vaginal Benoit balls to strengthen your pelvic floor. In fact, you don't need to do any of that. In this workshop, she'll teach you exactly what simple exercises really work to strengthen your pelvic floor and give you a plan to improve your pelvic floor fitness. Now, although this presentation, this webinar is directed towards women, men are free to come too. After all, we men have pelvic floors that need strengthening too. Again, this webinar is completely free, and information will be coming out via email for those of you that are on the mailing list. I've started a new tradition at the new year. Every week when we record a podcast, I will go find a review that someone has left on Apple Podcasts. And if you hear your review read, reach out to me at support@getyourmarriageon.com and I will mail you a prize. Here's a recent review that came in for the podcast. Again, you do this in the Apple Podcast app. You search for Get Your Marriage On and leave a review. This is what this kind reviewer said. She said, "My husband and I listen separately to episodes of Dan's podcast and then talk about them. They have improved the intimacy in our relationship, and I'm not just referring to sex life, although that has definitely improved. I would recommend the podcast to all married couples. There's always so much to learn. Our marriages don't need to remain stagnant. Thank you very much for that really kind review. I was sitting at the university library trying to focus on my studies, but I couldn't. My wife and I had been married for 2 weeks, and we were both married while we're still in university. We were in our junior years of college. And I had so many questions about sex, and I didn't know where to turn to. I was really nervous on how I could get these answers to the questions that were plaguing my mind. They were interfering with my ability to concentrate on my studies. And I was a really good student, so I spent a lot of time in the library, and I was pretty familiar with what the library offers. And then the thought came across that, I bet this university in little Rexburg, Idaho, would have a book on human sexuality. So I got up all the courage I had, and I went over to the computers, and I did a search to see what I could find. And lo and behold, I found a book on human sexuality, and I was really careful that no one saw what my search term was. I quickly wrote down the call number and closed the search window so no one would know what I was really looking for. Then I went back to my desk to study a little bit more with a little slip of paper with the call number, on the desk there. I was so nervous. Was I really going to go and find a sex book? I got up the courage about an hour later, and I got up and I went to that section of the library. The one on the third floor in the corner that only those kinds of books are at. I made super sure that no one else was looking. My eyes shifted to the left, my eyes shifted to the right, and then I proceeded to the part of the library where that book was. And I found it, I pulled it off the shelf, and I tucked it under my arm. And I didn't want to change my mind, so I quickly left the third floor, went down the 2 flights of stairs to where we can check out books. And I did not make eye contact with the young woman that was scanning books and taking my student card so I could check out this book. I didn't want her to know me and what I was getting into. I quickly stashed that book in my backpack and I went home. Just even relating this story, I feel my heart beating fast and I feel that nervousness come over my body. Just even telling you this story, I just know that feeling of being nervous about sex. It's very real to me. And it's one of the reasons why I think sex is so hard for a lot of people. Sex is so highly personal and it's a very anxious behavior, yet it's also at the core of who we are. So it's like this dichotomy. We want to be close to another person, yet in order to get there, we have to overcome a lot of nervousness and anxiety in order to enjoy that. And by the way, sex is so much more than just 2 bodies bumping into each other. It's our minds and our spirits are highly involved in sex as well. The reality is, men are no more prepared for a sexual relationship than women are. And casual sex isn't personal and can't create deep meaning. Humans are the only species on Earth capable of making meaning in sex. Dogs don't have sex and think, oh, he really loves me, or she was really into that. Like dogs and other animals don't do that. It's a very human thing to find meaning in sex. And that's a double-edged sword. For a lot of people, the anxiety in sex makes sex a horrible experience or a difficult experience to enjoy. But the flip side of it is the transcendent capacity for deep connection that can come through sex is one of the most unique human and wonderful things about being a person. Because sex can be weird, we can be nervous about it, we often fear it for many reasons. First, frankly speaking, sex is a weird part of being human. Let me ask you this. Do you remember the first time you recall learning about sex? And how did you feel about it? What was your reaction? I remember when I first learned about sex, it was from my sister's friend. She came over for a sleepover, and she gave us a sex education lesson using naked Barbie dolls. And I remember feeling a little like, that is really weird, right? Or think about French kissing. Like, really? You want to put your tongue in someone else's mouth and they're going to enjoy it? There's some really weird parts about being human. And there frankly is, speaking, a perverse side to our sexual side. For some couples, the idea of something that sounds perverse in a different context sounds very exciting and erotic in another context. Oral sex, anal sex are just some examples of what some people really like. Or they like the idea of power and dominance and submission. But in real life, they don't play those out in everyday living. It's just in the right context, there's this perverse side to our sexual side. And because of that, we kind of fear it. So when we don't know how to deal with it, we either shut it down or we tend to pander to it and we give in to it. And so we need to learn how to balance that better in ourselves and in our marriages. I've just given you one reason why I think couples struggle with sex, and I'm going to give you 7 more. The second reason why I think couples struggle with sex, or why sex is hard, is because a lack of sex education, or there's been false beliefs or traditions passed down by our parents or others. Most sex education is really male-centric and focuses a lot on reproduction or avoiding sexually transmitted infections, rather than talking about the pleasure side or the relational side or the bonding side that come through sex. Some of us may have even had poor role models. Let me ask you by a raise of your hands, how many of you listening to this podcast had parents that talked to you about sex? Good. Now keep raising your hand. How much of that conversation was just about biological reproduction, or was it more than that? If it was more than biological reproduction, keep raising your hand if the conversation happened more than once. And keep raising your hand if it included discussions about menstruation, body changes, and attraction. How about conversations about pleasure, about sexual anatomy, and what parts of the body are designed to feel good, and how to find pleasure in it, how to share that pleasure with another person in a sexual context? How about arousal? How about maintaining healthy boundaries during dating? Or how about how to own your own feelings and never do something sexually for another person just to win their approval or to get them to like you? You can see there's a lot more to sex than just reproduction. And sometimes we don't have the full picture in our upbringing to talk about it. And parents don't talk about sex that much, probably because as a child, they remembered feeling horrified when they first learned about sex. And it's a really difficult thing for them to imagine terrifying their own child by talking to them about sex too. So we tend to skirt around it or use euphemisms instead, or make it something we laugh about rather than something we celebrate and enjoy and teach in a healthy context. Now, that's not all, but we tend to blame our poor sex education on the church or school or society. But I believe it's the parents' job to teach our children about healthy sexuality. And in fact, I think the best way for you to teach your children about healthy sexuality is for you to invest in having a healthy sexual relationship with your spouse yourself. That is by far the best way you can set up your children for success. Along with poor role models and a very male-centric sex education, the sex education or false beliefs that often get in the way of having a good sex life is this idea that penetrative sex is the only kind of sex that really counts. Another is this tradition or this idea that all women should be able to orgasm from penetration alone, or that orgasm is easy and natural because the movies sure make it sound like it. Another false tradition that seems to get in the way of couples having a good sex life is the idea that sex is for the man or it's for the husband. I invite you to invest in a good sexual education for yourself and keep educating yourself on what it means to have a good sexual relationship, a grand sexual relationship for you and for your spouse that will bless your marriage today and your children and your grandchildren generations to follow. The third challenge as to why sex is hard for couples is in a marriage relationship, you're always going to have a higher and a lower desire spouse. It doesn't matter who you married. One of you at some time or another is going to have more desire than the other person. And the lower desire spouse controls the frequency of sex in the relationship. Just because you and your spouse differ in sex drives or levels of sexual desire isn't a problem because every couple has that. But how you deal with those differences is the opportunity or the challenge that, depending on how you look at it, that every couple faces. When you look at it as this is our opportunity to bridge a gap here, this is our opportunity to be more honest, this is our opportunity to come together and work together as a collaborative team to build something better, which, by the way, requires a lot of maturity, a lot of honesty. But when you can do that and do away with your anxiety, then that's where you can really see building and strength and growth in your marriage relationship. The fourth reason why sex is hard is due to cultural problems. Now, there are cultural problems that women face, that men face, then that all of us face to one degree or another. When talking about cultural challenge that women specifically face, a lot of women's sexuality is often defined relative to male sexuality. For example, it takes a man on average 6 minutes to climax in sex, but it takes 25 minutes on average for a woman to climax in sex. It's almost saying that women take too long. But remember, in that discussion, the male is the reference point. If women were the reference point in sexuality, it'll be that women are the normal ones who take 25 minutes, and the men are the weirdos that they're done in 6 minutes. The men are missing out on all that foreplay and pleasure. Just in our modern culture, we make the male sexuality the standard and often show women relative to that, rather than studying both together. Masters and Johnson, the famous scientists that studied human sexuality in the 1950s and 60s, often studied men first in their labs and defined their sexual response cycle relative to a way a man reaches orgasm and resolution in sex. And later on, research has showed that female sexuality often follows a different pattern than men. So thankfully, modern research is catching up, and we're having better ideas on the differences between female and male sexuality. Another cultural challenge that women face is women aren't supposed to like sex. Well, they're supposed to like it a little bit, but not a lot, but not supposed to like it none at all. It's kind of this weird in-between thing. Like, think about it. If a woman likes sex a lot, what do people call you behind your back, right? It's not a pleasant thing. Another cultural problem women face is women are taught to accommodate men's desire, meaning he likes sex, he wants it, and it's your duty as a wife to give it to him. Or women are often taught you're the gatekeeper. Like in a dating relationship, you don't want to get too far. He's not going to be able to control himself. So ladies, it's your job to not get too far. You're the gatekeeper. You need to be the strong one. It's like you're the designated driver in the sexual relationship when you don't want to cross a line. It's this double standard we often give against women, not in their favor. And the antidote to all of this, I believe, is for women to desire sex and to take their own sexual desire seriously. It's when, as a woman, you view sex as an important part of being a woman. It's a great part of being human. And you no longer buy into the contradictions and double standards that the culture gives you. Now, there's also challenges culturally that men face that make sex hard for men. Men are often taught that you're the predators, women are the prey, and it's despicable to be a predator. Therefore, you got to really constrain yourself here and don't be a predator. The other problem that men face is they're taught that sex can be really destructive and take you down and others with it. Thus, it really needs to be something you need to clamp down. On the other hand, men are culturally told that you're coin-operated and you're supposed to be always in the mood for sex and think of nothing else. But when you're not coin-operated, or you're not in the mood, or you think of other things, something must be wrong with you. And so there's this double standard because, of course, women aren't supposed to be in the mood all the time, but men are. So we kind of have that challenge men face about not being allowed to not have desire all the time. For men, they're also culturally taught that they need to know how sex works. They're supposed to be the confident one in the bedroom and be responsible for drawing out the women's sexuality. Men are often culturally taught that conflicts around sexual desire make men apologetic for wanting sex. It's like, I want to have sex with you. I hope it's okay that I tell you that I want you. It's okay if you don't want it, but I do. So they're very apologetic. And I see that a lot in my men's coaching. Men are really apologetic to their wives for wanting to have sex with them because they're kind of taught that it's actually kind of wrong, or there's something about desiring sex that makes you less desirable as a man. The flip side of that is being entitled to sex. And culturally, some men are like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast, right? They're like entitled, I'm the world's greatest thing, women should flock to me. Or it's this other idea of entitlement, like this is the reward for good behavior, is to have a sexually abundant wife, right? We hear those stories too. Now, If the antidote for women is to take charge of their desire, what most men need in light of the cultural challenges we face is the antidote for men is to be desirable. It's to live in a way that your wife would like to desire you because you are a desirable person. And you also see sex as a way to nurture, express tenderness and vulnerability and masculine strength. Okay, we talked about cultural challenges. Let's talk about a very specific type of cultural challenge for number 5, why sex is hard. And it's about our society's tendency to control or fear sex. Now, I believe that reserving sexual relationships for a committed marriage is good for all persons and for our society to flourish. I think it should be the standard, and I believe that's God's standard too. However, when that standard is taught from a place of fear, you get a special type of culture that can emerge. Some people refer to this as purity culture, but what it really is a fear-based way of trying to control people's sexual behavior. This is the lessons in church, for example, that you might hear about, and that doesn't have to be church, but in a family setting, of where if you have sex before you're ready for the commitment of marriage, then you're spoiled forever, you're damaged goods, or you're no longer wanted, or your value decreases. I don't believe any of that, but the motivation behind those is all about fear, trying to control someone through fear. I was really good friends with a girl in college, and she talked about how in their family, her older sister had had sex outside of wedlock, and as a family, they had a lesson, and her dad got a dollar bill and with scissors cut it in half and said, it's not worth $1 anymore when you have sex before marriage. It loses its value completely. And he gave each of his daughters a crisp $1 bill, and the message was, you will lose the value of who you are if you use your sexuality outside of marriage. Now, I think the parents had really good intentions, and I'm not judging them for that. We just got to be careful when we use fear as the motivation to help people, keep that commitment that sex should be for marriage. A much better way to paint this is helping individuals understand that it's their choice. And choose what's very, very best for you. Own it. Own your sexuality. And teach that sex is something worth waiting for because it is good. It will bind you and your spouse together. And so why wouldn't you not want to wait for that commitment of marriage to fully express your sexuality? That's a conversation for another episode we can do a deeper dive on. But we have that problem that makes sex hard in our culture. The 6th reason why sex is difficult is we do have a anything goes, a cheapening devaluation of sex in our larger culture too. This is where casual sex is accepted. This is where we have a loss of that moral anchor that we need for societies to flourish. And it goes against the biological bonding that I believe happens in sex. When you believe you can have sex casually with lots of different partners and pretend that it doesn't affect you, I believe it does affect you in some way. Or couples that decide to open up their marriage and have sex with other partners as if there's no consequences to that. The very fabric of your marriage relationship tends to weaken and wither away because there's a biological bonding that happens during sex with any person. So sharing that with a different person or many different people, it cheapens it. It loses that value. The 7th reason why sex is hard is we all experience sexual dysfunction. We got to talk about this. It happens. In fact, it's normal. Everyone experiences some sexual dysfunction from time to time. And by sexual dysfunction, I'm talking about, like for women, it can be painful intercourse or anorgasmia, which means you can't have an orgasm. By the way, if any of those are for you, come to our free workshop next week, Friday, where we're going to do a deep dive on all of these things. It's again at noon Mountain Time on the 19th. For men, sexual dysfunction looks like erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation or delayed orgasm, or some other things related to those things. A lot of times we have medications that interfere, or we have a lot of stress, we don't get enough sleep, or we have insufficient physical stimulation during sex. But the biggest thing that overrides all of these that I've seen is just our nervousness, our anxiety about sex. reduces the stimulation that our body can accept to fully enjoy the sexual experience. If you have anything that interferes with your ability to fully relax and enjoy the sexual experience with your spouse, or if you're consumed with anxiety or nervousness or body image issues, get coaching. Coaching can really help you overcome those barriers, and so you're no longer missing out on the greatness that good sex can offer you. And my eighth and final reason why I think sex is difficult for couples is sex abuse and trauma happens. Research shows 1 in 4 women report having unwanted sexual attention or abuse, and 1 in 6 men report having unwanted sexual attention or abuse. Another interesting statistic, 1 in 10 rape victims today are men. If you have any sexual abuse or trauma in your past, I have so much compassion for you. I am so sorry these things have happened to you. It is a really difficult thing that you endured, but it doesn't have to be your permanent story. You can get the help you need, find a fantastic therapist or a coach that specializes in these things to help you work through these things so that you can fully enjoy the sexual experiences that you're fully capable of having. The reality is we get better at sex as we develop as a person. You know, I think technique matters, like being a really good lover, like, it's the clockwise to the right, not to the left, wink, wink, just kidding. But technique matters. But your capacity to desire another person, to be desirable, to be desired by another person, and how to express that through sex requires a lot of development as a person. Sadly, I never read that book that I got from the library. I was too nervous. I flipped open the pages, I flipped through it, and I saw a tastefully drawn illustrated drawing of a couple having sex. And I thought, oh, I'm not supposed to see this. And I shut the book and I returned it to the library. I was way too nervous. I was way too anxious and way too immature to read it. And I often think about if I could go back in time to give myself advice in that moment, what would I have told myself? I would probably tell myself that, it's okay to feel a little discomfort about sex. It's okay to be nervous about the topic. I mean, it's very personal. It's new. It can be kind of weird sometimes. I'd also tell myself that, this is really highly intimate behavior, and how I choose to express sexuality with my wife and how she chooses to express to me is really our own business. I'd also tell myself that there's really good fruit on the other side. If I could just sit with that discomfort long enough to go through the book without judgment and just learn, there's so much good on the other side of it, right? I believe sex is a very powerful language. If I want to communicate love, desire, acceptance, gratitude, or share of the goodness within me with someone else, I can't think of a better way to do that than through my sexuality. I also know that sex can bind a marriage so closely together that it withstands a lot of difficulties and ups and downs of life. And I believe good sex leads people to be more honest, open, trustworthy, true, chaste, and benevolent, and it helps us endure all things, all the ups and downs of life. Thank you for listening. And if there's anything I can do to help you advance or move the needle in a positive direction in your marriage, please reach out to me. You can work with me. You can go to getyourmarriageon.com and have all the options there. And I encourage you to seriously consider signing up for our upcoming marriage retreat. It's going to be a fantastic experience for you and your spouse. I can guarantee it. Talk to you next week.